Hello, my name is Stolen Crescent, and today I'm doing my final presentation for ENV 31101, titled The Effect of Climate Change on the PI Potato Industry. So for my presentation, I will be giving you an outline of my final research paper, what I'm doing for it, and what I also intend to do. So I will explore the objective/goal of my research paper, how this goal is being achieved, and also some source analysis. So how I plan to look through my sources and implement them within the paper. So to start off, what is the objective/goal of the research paper? And the reason I include this in my presentation is because I like to have an overarching goal or sort of a theme to my work rather than just working towards getting a grade. So what this theme is really what I want to give to the readers, what I want the readers to understand at the end. And what I want readers to understand for my research paper are these three main things. The first one is I want to illustrate climate change to a broader audience, and this broader audience being people on the island and people who may potentially read the research paper later. And I feel like this is very important because public perception of climate change right now is really not at a spot where it should be. And this is mainly due to the rise of some public figures and conservative media where people seem to not see the full potential and scope of climate change, which I think is very dangerous. And also, many people just seem to be ignorant of climate change. It's out of sight, it's out of mind. And what I would like to do in my paper is show what climate change is in a more tangible sense and how it's going to affect us. And I say affect us, it's tied into my next point here, which is understanding why climate change is relevant locally. So how is climate change going to affect us here on PEI? And really the best way to do this is show how it's going to affect one of our biggest industries, which is the agricultural potato industry, which is, it's a huge supplier of jobs, of money in terms of trade goods from the province to other provinces and globally. And just many people are very familiar with the idea of PI potatoes. So showing how that could potentially be changed or altered for better or for worse by climate change is something that is really valuable and could really help change public opinion on climate change. And finally, I would also like to show how we can counteract these issues realistically, because another common public perception of climate change is that it's the apocalypse. Not many people are going to survive at the end. The world is going to change drastically and for the worse. And again, that's another not true perception. So I would like to show how climate change and its effects can be mitigated on the island relative to the agricultural industry and how we can also adapt to it. So how is this goal of mine being achieved in the research paper? So first, to see how the potato industry will be affected by climate change, we have to establish what exactly is the potato industry. So here we have a list of the things that I will be looking at in my paper. So I'd like to see what the most common and most profitable strains of potato grown on the island are, such as you can see in the image, whites, reds, and russets, with russets being probably the most widely grown crop just on the island in general. So it's important to look at the different strains of potatoes because obviously they're not all the same. They have different needs in terms of nutrient level and moisture and just ambient temperature, soil temperature. So understanding how climate change will affect these is really important in establishing how it can affect the industry as a whole. So as I was saying earlier, the optimum growth conditions for these potatoes will be altered. So we need to see what are the most important growth conditions for potatoes and why these growth conditions may be altered by climate change. So we have to identify these conditions first of all. And of course, we also have to look at the storage and exportation of potatoes. So this is kind of more focused on the economy related to potatoes on the island. So first of all, we have storage conditions. Potatoes need to be stored at a correct humidity, at a correct temperature, and even their exposure to sunlight should be very minimal. And this, I mean, sunlight won't change, but the rest of the variables that affect storage conditions will probably be altered with climate change. And again, in terms of the economy, we have to see who is buying our potatoes. Will they be affected by climate change? Will other markets emerge from climate change that may be competitive to our potatoes? And also legislative changes. So for more sustainable farming practices, could we see some cuts to the profit margins on the island? And then there's some other things like the workforce. Did people leave due to climate change and all that? So again, how is this goal being achieved? And we have to look at how will climate change affect these things that I've just listed. So first we have to define what climate change is, and especially what does climate change actually change relative to the island. So this is a really good image here of sort of well, there's a farmhouse and this is a pasture, and I got this image from the PI Climate Lab, but it shows this tangible thing of sea level rise and how climate change will actually influence how much the sea rises, and the sea could rise, or the sea actually will rise in the near future. So I have three main targets here of analyzation. So first one is the impact on growth conditions from climate change. So precipitation, will things get too wet or too dry, like in droughts, or will precipitation just be too erratic from climate change? Temperature, soil temperature is very important in the growth and maintenance of potatoes. And then sea level rise and erosion, because a lot of our farms, or our whole island is just surrounded by water. So we would have to see what farms could be affected by sea level rise, and if they grow potatoes, and could uh, these erosive factors from climate change be potentially bad for the island. The next thing to look at is pest/disease proliferation. So here are some common pests/diseases for potatoes. Wireworm, potato blight, pollen beetles are new. They came from Europe and they're proliferating rapidly across the island due to climate change and how the temperatures are just getting warm enough for them to reproduce quickly. And finally, I'd also like to see changes to the economy of the industry, which I touched on a lot in the previous slide. So trade markets, who might be affected. PI exports a lot to Trinidad and Tobago, which is an island nation in the Caribbean, which may be heavily altered from climate change in the near future. So we'd probably have to explore new markets, and just the economy in general, how prices might change. I'm not sure this will be a big part of my paper, but I definitely think it's important for the industry. So finally, we look here at source analysis. I would like to have an annotated bibliography, which will give like a general summary of the papers, some important quotes that I would like to include, some important statistics, and most of all, I would like to analyze each source individually in a more close matter, just to improve my own understanding of the sources when I put them in my paper. And I also like to use a variety of sources. So you can see this is a preliminary sort of list of sources. It will definitely expand in the future, but these are the sources I would like to look at for my paper. And I'd also like to look at sources locally, because they give a more local sense of knowledge, which is definitely valuable for writing the paper. And yeah, that is my current progress for the final research paper of ENV 3110.